Hey everybody, I'm Scott Wikle. You're listening to My Kind of Country. My special guest worked at the Bakersfield Californian newspaper from 1973 to 1985, and he was right there for a whole lot of Bakersfield country music history. This is Bryce Martin. Bryce, how are you tonight?
Hey, I'm doing fine, Scott. I guess we haven't talked before. It's good to talk to you.
Well, I appreciate it. It was very nice of you to get in touch with me, and we obviously have a lot of musical things in common, so I'm looking forward to talking with you this evening.
Well, I noticed that. That's kind of what drew me to you. Anybody that has an interest in the vintage Bakersfield, California music scene, and who is a big Merle Haggard fan, is somebody I would always enjoy talking to, you know.
Well, Bryce, before we start talking about all the great music stuff, give me a little bit of your background and how you wound up in California.
Well, doesn't everybody wind up out there in California at some time or another? It seems like it.
Seems like
it. Bakersfield is or was known. It has several nicknames, like a lot of towns. Oklahoma of the West, and without going into the deep history, a lot of people know, that Bakersfield is in Kern County. It's the capital seat in Kern County. And Kern County and the county next to it are the largest agricultural producing counties in the United States. And they grow everything there just about except coffee. And so the people in the Midwest who left for various reasons, economic reasons, and dust bowl conditions, many of those people were rural people who were connected to the soil. They were used to planting and cropping and all that. And also oil is a big business out in Bakersfield in that area too, in the San Joaquin Valley. And and me included, I'm from Kansas. I was born in Kansas, right on the Missouri state line in the extreme southeast part of Kansas. And most of the people in Bakersfield who made a little bit of a dent in country music, maybe locally there, regionally, or nationally, most of them, from my estimation, were from Oklahoma. And some were Missouri, Kansas, Texas. Arkansas, those are the main places where they came from. Of course, they could have came from anywhere. Some did come from California. Merle was born in California, but he's still pretty much of an Okie because his parents were from Oklahoma. What drew me was I had a lot of relatives in California, because California is a pretty large state, and there's a lot of different types of work there. And so I had a lot of relatives that did work for some of the government jobs. Some of the companies that made parts for airplanes and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of that going on in California. So they were pretty well spread out. So I first visited relatives in California in 1958. I drove out there when I was 14 with my grandfather, and I drove back. And in the early 60s, I went to California just kind of for a change of pace. I didn't have anything in mind, but I had a lot of relatives, and that was like a new vista, a new place to go. So I was young, and I had the burden of the draft over me, and I just wanted to, test the waters here and there.
So how did you come to end up working at the Bakersfield Californian?
Well, when I was in high school, I was a class reporter every year. I always had an interest in reading and writing. I wanted to get into journalism, and I'd been going to college. No one at the newspaper, the Californian, was writing. They didn't have regular articles written about what was going on in country music in Bakersfield. There was a lot going on. And the circulation for the Sunday newspaper was around 65,000. And I guess during the week it was, less than that, but it was pretty good size circulation. So I just went in there one day and asked them, why they didn't cover country music there locally, because there was a lot to cover. And they said, well, to be honest, we don't know anything about it. Do you? And I said, yes, I do. And I said, I also have an interest in journalism. So about a month later, they had called me down there, and they took me in there and took my picture, and they said, we'll run your picture with your work, and then that way people will recognize you when you show up, you know. Take a couple of weeks, go around, meet everybody, and start putting it all together, and that was it. There wasn't really a job opening. I guess I created the job, you know.
So tell me about some of the people that you wrote about and some of the people that you were around in country music. I'm sure Merle Haggard was one of them.
He was one of them. I don't really remember, you know, who was when I first met any of them. I don't think, but I basically knew who everybody was because I either had met them and talked to them and interviewed them and written about them, or I knew who they were. I probably knew more than anybody else because people tend to have their own little crowds they're with, and they don't have room to get in touch with everybody. So I was kind of on the outside there, keeping track of everybody, and I had more of an overall knowledge of who was who probably than anyone, and. But Maeve Nutter was probably the first one I wrote about for no particular reason. Maeve, I did a lot of film and movie work. Good-looking guy. He recorded for Capitol Records. He was there in Bakersfield, originally from West Virginia. And I did one on the guy who wrote the song Buckaroo, Bob Morris, played bass guitar. And I did one on him and the guy who wrote the song The Pill. He lived there locally, older guy. And Merle, and I didn't do much on Buck. I tried to stay away from the big names like Buck and Merle because, you know, there was so much coverage on them anyway, and they're so used to talking to the media. They have kind of regular pat answers, you know, so. But I would go by and see Merle from time to time in his office. I could have spent more time with him, but I tried to I tried to be professional and keep a professional distance from everybody. It was kind of hard to do because some were very likable, like Bill Woods was, Bonnie Owens was very likable. You know, I did 5 or 6 articles to start out with, and I was going to save those. So if I got ill or something, I could always have something to draw back on. But you know how that works out. I use those up pretty quick. And I always kind of put my pressure on myself, and I had a deadline if I wanted to do my column, which I did. That was something I wanted to do every week. The rest of it I would just kind of turn in entertainment whenever I got it done. I was pretty much left alone to do what I wanted to do.
You mentioned so many artists from Bakersfield. There was a great documentary that was released recently called Treble and Twang that Di Sharman put together. And it really did showcase a lot of those folks. You mentioned some of them like Bill Woods and Red Simpson and Billy Mize, Bonnie Owens. So many that really didn't get a whole lot of mainstream attention. You know, it was always Buck and Merle. And it really dove into the history of those people and kind of showcased what they did and their contributions to Bakersfield. So it sounds like you were around a lot of those same kind of people.
Yeah, Oscar Whittington, who was basically a fiddle player. In fact, he was one of the earlier guys. He came to Bakersfield in late, around 46 or 47. He was a guy who, around 1973, he says, Bryce, you ought to do a book right now because the Urban Cowboy movie was out and country music was getting, it was kind of a hot item. He said, now would be the time to put a book out. And I personally was thinking, well, to myself, I was thinking, Merle and Buck, nobody would know who anybody else was. You know, I mean, but here I am all these years later putting the book together, and I'm doing what he suggested in 1973.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you're doing a book. When do you think you're going to have that done?
Well, I don't know. I'm lazy, I guess. Well, no, I guess I have that fear of failure. You know, I got that little devil inside me telling me, it's no good, you know. But I don't know. I hope to have it done, well, I was going to say this year, but I better say next year. I have a lot of it done because a lot of it will be kind of an anthology in a way. Merle, I'll tell you, he caught my eye when he first showed up on the scene. I'm going to break every heart I can, I remember that, but when he had swinging doors and that Mama Tried, and he had that sound, you know, from his band, I thought, man, that was like that really was, that was really something refreshing to me. It was like, wow, this guy, And I still haven't gotten over it. I still, when I play that song Poncho and Lefty and Merle comes on there, his part, I get goosebumps.
Yeah. So I was curious. You mentioned a little while ago that when you went to work at the Bakersfield Californian, that no one was really writing about country music, and yet it was such a big deal out there. I'm a little surprised at that. What was kind of the whole general consensus about the whole country music scene out in Bakersfield with people?
Well, Scott, that's a good question, and I can. At the Californian specifically, they had pretty much everything covered, but they didn't. But country music was when Buck opened up his studios, he had a quite a few people working for him in his offices, radio station, all combined, and then Merle had an office and everything, and so. Buck was the only one who really put out much publicity, and when he sent when his publicity people would send something to the Californian, the business editor would usually get it, or sometimes it would be a news item, and usually related to something else, like they'd have the annual what they call a sheriff's posse parade, and they'd have a country music entertainment there. It'd be some kind of a tie-in, usually with something annual event. I just, on my own, I thought, well, so I guess the reason why they didn't is because they didn't. I don't think they could budget someone specifically, for that beat, and they didn't have anyone that covered anything else that could move over and from time to time cover that scene. So when I brought that up to them, I went to the managing editor, talked to the right person, and when I brought that up to them, that created an interest where they decided to go ahead and do something. But overall, listen, nobody was jealous of my job. Even the people who were there from Oklahoma and the younger people, they were trying to get away from country music because they didn't want to be hick. And nobody wanted my job. I don't think they called me the hick writer, and they thought all I cared about was country music, and I was actually just a journalist. I mean, if it'd been a rock and roll town, I'd been writing about rock and roll, or whatever. But I just happen to know quite a bit about country music and all music, and so and then also entertainment. Basically, an entertainment writer. It just kind of caught. It was really catching on there as far as getting a national interest. Sometimes on the charts, Buck and Merle would have They'd have recordings back to back, maybe in the top 5 and the top 100 records all over the country. There were probably about a dozen clubs. I call them clubs. You can call them taverns, saloons, beer joints, clubs. There were probably about a dozen clubs where they had regular bands there. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people now say, "Boy, I'd sure like to have been back there during that time." Well. You would have just been back there during that time. They wouldn't. I could say it seems more special to people who were never there, And I wouldn't say that it was routine, but it was just the life we were living back then.
So, of all the people that you had a chance to get to know and get to interview and such, what is someone who really stands out? Maybe you can share a story from one of those people that really stand out for you.
Well, Bonnie Owens was great. I used to hear that expression back in those days about somebody not being real, and I never really knew quite what that meant until I met Bill Woods and I met Bonnie Owens, and those people, I can tell you, were real. And Bill Woods is kind of like that special teacher you had in school who you knew that he felt like he wanted all of his pupils, his students, to succeed. There was nothing phony about any of them. They were just straight up people. They were. I'm sure they weren't perfect, and maybe there might have been some people who didn't care for them. I don't know. I never heard of anyone who didn't care for Bill Woods or Bonnie Owens. But those are two people who really stood out as just wonderful people.
Yes.
Fred Maddox, he was interesting. Red Simpson, very interesting guy. Fred played that stand-up bass, and the story behind the Maddox family, it's been well documented. But Fred lived in Delano, just a little bit outside of Bakersfield. That was in his latter years. He'd been pretty much retired lived around Bakersfield. But he and his family were picking cotton up around Pixley, which is north of Bakersfield. And he told his mama, which she was kind of the manager, and that that there must be a better way. So, back then people bought their record players at furniture stores because you had the big record players. They were part of your furniture.
Right.
And so Fred, they went to this furniture store and talked to the guy to give them a 15-minute radio show sponsoring them. The next day, the next day they were on that radio, and Fred had bought this stand-up bass, and he didn't know how to play it. He never did actually learn how to play the bass, but he could do what was required of him for what they were doing. He could thump it and be in time and make the sound, but he didn't really know how to play it. He just no, technically he didn't know. He didn't know if you put your fingers here, that's the chord C or whatever it was. And so he told me one time they were playing in San Bernardino, California, and they had a raised stage, and they had an intermission. They'd always have an intermission between shows. And he said they were playing, and he said he kind of noticed this one guy just kept looking at him. He wasn't looking at anything else. So when they took their break, he propped his big stand-up bass fiddle up, and the guy walked up to the stage, and he said, "Hey, I've been watching you, and you're not really playing that thing, are you?" Fred, I said, "No, but I've got the job."
True enough.
Then I saw Fred, it was years later, Merle did a concert in Bakersfield, and it was outside, and I got there early, and I was up there messing around, and they had the stage set up, and there was hardly anybody was there. There was nobody in the audience who was there yet. And Fred was there, and he asked me if I'd tune his bass for him. And I thought he was kidding, And I just kind of laughed, And a guy showed up, and he went over and tuned the piano, because Mark Urey would be playing the piano a little bit later. And Fred came around again and asked me if I'd tune his bass. And I said, "Fred, you don't want me to tune that bass." Anyway, Roy Nichols showed up, and he asked Roy, and Roy tuned his bass. So he really did one. Not only couldn't play it, he didn't know how to tune it. Another, Lou Talley and Fuzzy Owen, both cousins from Arkansas. Uh-huh. Bill Woods told me that somebody suggested that when they first got there, they hadn't been there very long, to go down there and sign up with the union, And Bill was telling me that the guy that was talking to them asked Lou, he said, "Can you read music?" And he said, "Boy, Lou got all red-faced." And he said, "Sure, I can read music." But he didn't say music, though. He said, "Can you read?" And Lou said, "Sure, I can read." Fuzzy kind of nudged him and said, "Lou, I think he means music."
That's
but
great.
Those country guys, I asked some of them if they read music, and they usually would say, "Yeah, but not enough to hurt my playing."
I love it. Well, Bryce, I really want to thank you for taking time to share some of your memories today, and I hope you'll keep me posted on your book. And when you get it finished, put me down for a copy, and I'd love to have you back on the show and talk some more about it. I think that would be great.
Well, Scott, find some way to get something where I can have short answers. I'm too windy, I guess.
Oh, you did great. That's fabulous. I really appreciate it. Well, we're going to play some great Bakersfield Sound music for you as we continue, and really enjoyed talking with you. Bryce Martin, thank you so much for being on My Kind of Country.
I thank you, Scott. Have a good day.